Second Nature, episode 72. Allison Lynch, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
The cool thing about our conversation before this podcast, we were kind of comparing notes and we realized that we've actually run in extremely parallel paths. You were at Whoop and one of the early employees there, and I was at Oura. So actually, like before this, we were sort of competitors, but now we've moved on and we can have actually, I think, a pretty interesting discussion based off of what we learned kind of doing the same thing. You know, we've worked with athletes, we've worked with creators, we've worked with all kinds of interesting people to kind of bring these visions to life on behalf of brands. And I think today's discussion is going to be a good chance to kind of dive into all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's cool knowing that you worked at Aura because they were definitely our number one competitor when I worked for Whoop. And it was like, oh, what's Aura doing? Oh, they're doing cool stuff with sleep. We got to do that. So.
How did you get started? How did you get in the door at Whoop? You were early in, and they're kind of started in the area that you live. But what got you in the door there, and what did you do at first?
Yeah, so I'm from Boston originally. Whoop is a Boston-based company. And I did get in early. I was actually recruited on LinkedIn from their hiring manager, which I know it's like, when do you ever respond to those messages on LinkedIn? It's like, but at the time I was working for a healthcare company doing marketing and, working with Blue Cross and Harvard Pilgrim. And it was just very dry and very sterile. And, I really wanted to do something different and something new. And when they sent me that message, I was just like, yeah, I had never heard of this company. I was like, what is a Whoop? Like, I don't, like, this might not even be real. But, I was curious enough. So I took the opportunity and I went in for an interview, and the office was so cool. Our first office was behind Fenway Park, and it was super flashy and super, Will Ahmed, he's the CEO, like he knows what he's doing in terms of, when he wanted people to come in the door and professional athletes to come through the door, he wanted that experience to be premium and A plus. And I think as soon as I walked in that door, I was like, this company's doing something really cool. I don't quite know where it's going yet, but I do want to be a part of it. So yeah, I was hired, I think back in 2016, and the product hadn't even launched yet. So we were kind of like in our beta version, the 1.0. So we were getting ready to launch the Whoop 2.0. And I was hired to essentially lead all marketing communications for that and help build out a plan for email, for social, working with, at the time, our VP, Jack Seitz, working on PR communications. And, it was really just about communicating the value proposition in a market where that product wasn't really, people weren't super focused on recovery. Nobody knew what HRV was. The topic of sleep and really optimizing sleep wasn't kind of like in the mainstream. So we were really early in kind of communicating that message. And yeah, it was my job to kind of help do that. So I had the best time at Whoop. I loved every minute of it. It was so fast and the growth was immense. And, but yeah, I'm also like curious too, like you're at Aura and, HRV and sleep, like those are getting so popular and so recognized, by the everyday consumer.
You know what's crazy is to put in context what you were doing when you were doing it. Like when you joined Whoop, wearables, I don't really think people had Apple Watches, sure, but I don't think wearables as a category had really become a thing at that stage. And I remember the early days of Oura, it was the same thing. The first version of the Oura was this giant ring, and then it got better. And I had an Oura ring, one of the three Oura Ring 3.0. No, I'm sorry, 2.0 ones. And I'd gotten it, I think, as a gift from my wife, and then I had such an amazing time with it that I actually gifted one to every single one of my Red Bull athletes. I was like, this has been game changing for me, getting to know all this data that I never had access to before. My sleep data, my activity tracking, like all these different elements that, yeah, I would get the data from like if I ran far, but I wouldn't get the rest of the picture. And now I have the rest of the picture. This is game changing for me, and I can only imagine how good it's going to be for all of my athletes. And a lot of them to this day are still rocking that. So I had a friend that actually went to work at Oura, and I remember hitting him up being like, dude, anything I can do. You need access to my athletes. You need access to anything that I have access to. I got you. And he was an OG Red Bull guy. He was kind of my sort of prototype of like who I wanted to one day aspire to be. And a couple weeks later, he's like, actually, the thing I need is you. Can you just come here? And I didn't really think about leaving Red Bull until that came to me. It was like, whoa, if I was ever going to work for another company, this is the one. Like they're working with really cool athletes. I believe in the product. I'm already like obsessed with it. And I think if I go work there, I'm going to learn even more about it. And I think that's the other thing too, because when you're working at a company like Whoop or Aura, you have access to all kinds of interesting data of where they're trying to go. And you can kind of help people out by bringing them on board with it and see that kind of awakening happen of like, oh, wait, hold on a second. Like I thought having a glass of wine before bed was supposed to be good. And look what it does to my sleep. I think that was the number one thing. I don't know if you saw that in the recovery stats at Whoop too, but people like quit drinking the second they got.
That was always the biggest reveal of like what is affecting your recovery. And yeah, I mean, you said like it's not just a device that you would wear to like go track your run or whatever, just go to the gym. It's a 24/7 tracking device. It's like a lifestyle device, and it really opened up my eyes to so many things within my own, my body and my performance. And then yeah, every single athlete I worked with, they were like, "Oh my God, like I had no idea. I didn't know that this affected my recovery, or I didn't know that going to bed at different times every single night would actually negatively impact me, or as long as I was getting 8 hours, I thought that was good." And yeah, the alcohol was always a huge thing. People were like, "Oh my God, I'm never having a beer again." Like my HRV is, tanking, my resting heart rate goes up by 8 beats. And um, yeah, I feel like legit. I mean, I've never like drank a lot of alcohol anyway, but like I would just go out with friends and be like, "Sorry, I'm not gonna have a glass of wine tonight. Sorry, my whoop. Sorry." I became one of those people.
Oh yeah, I'm completely off the sauce now. And even like a heavy meal, like when I go to bed really full, it's like almost the same effect of like heart rate goes up, HRV goes down. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk a little bit more about the athletes that you got a chance to work with, because that's obviously a huge part for both of us at both brands. Athletes were sort of the early adopters to both of these products and to wearables in general. And they really were the most effective, I think, in the beginning of speaking to the benefits. And while maybe you weren't going to have a crazy high HRV and have to go run an ultra marathon, the average person could still benefit substantially from having one of these. But athletes played a big role in sort of unlocking. I think it was sort of like athletes and then tech entrepreneurs also like kind of led the charge in this thing of like optimization of your daily life. So how did that work for you when it came to athletes? Did you have a filter for who you were trying to get in the door at Whoop, or what were sort of the things that brought somebody into the brand?
Yeah, from the early days, it was very much the elite athlete, because it was all about performance optimization. And so, we worked with mostly pro leagues at the time. Like we worked with the MLB, we worked with the NFL Players Association. Um, I think we worked with the Pelicans. Yeah, we did. We worked with the Pelicans, and a couple other teams in the NBA. And a lot of it was just working directly with coaches and trainers so they could bring that product to their athletes, because we weren't really ready to be available to the general consumer yet. We just weren't like a Fitbit type of audience, and we weren't trying to be that. We really were trying to establish ourselves as this like very premium product that elite athletes used. And we also did a lot with the NCAA too, like working with like we worked with Harvard, Boston University. We worked with, a lot of Division I programs to, again, kind of legitimize our product and help coaches when it came to, learning about their athletes and helping them optimize. And yeah, when it came to like the athlete marketing side of things, what really allowed us to take off was actually investing in CrossFit. CrossFit was a perfect outlet for the Whoop product because it wasn't a GPS watch. It didn't have a watch face giving you time and stuff. Like it was strain, sleep, recovery. And CrossFit athletes at the time like didn't really have a wearable that could really track things for them. And um, with CrossFit too, it's such a it's such a cult brand. You're gonna do everything and anything that the lead CrossFitters are doing, and um, it was just a perfect product for it because a lot of the athletes at the time were like paleo and doing very strict dieting, and they had very strict regimens, and the Whoop just kind of catered to that. And some of the early CrossFit athletes I worked with, Brooke Wells, Brooke Entz, Sam Dancer, Josh Bridges, and that was a totally new world for me because I'm a runner. I come from a running background, and CrossFit is literally the opposite spectrum for me. Um, so I got to learn so much just about CrossFit athletes and what they do, and I really do respect a lot of CrossFit athletes. I think there's a lot of hate against CrossFit, but what they do is they're extremely dedicated and they're trying to optimize every single aspect of their life. And the Whoop device just worked perfectly for that.
It's interesting to think about the concept of community, and love them or hate them, the CrossFit community is very strong at communicating with each other to highlight brands that are speaking to their space and are useful in terms of exactly what you said, optimizing their life. Oh, this thing is helping me get from point A to point B. We actually had Tia Claire Toomey on the Oura brand, and she was like kept winning the big CrossFit thing every year. But if I'm honest, I think, and actually from behind the scenes, she actually did drive a lot. If I compared her next to CP3 or some of the other elite pro athletes that we had, Tia Claire was delivering on a really high level when it came to even like her affiliate link and stuff like that. Now, obviously, she got paid more than just an affiliate kickback, but using the link that we gave her, it was one of the highest performing athlete ones on there. But the thing about it is that Tia Claire was also not only winning, but had a really big YouTube channel that was documenting her process. And so hard to separate the signal from the noise there. Was it coming from the 1,000,000+ subscribers on her YouTube channel that were rabid about watching every single thing she released, including content with us? Or was it because she was winning the biggest event in the space? Probably a little bit of both.
Yeah.
What I'd love to know is, when you're selecting athletes or when you're getting into an area where you're coming from this track and field running background and you're approaching CrossFit or approaching really any new sport, what are the things that you do to kind of get into the sport? Because I think a lot of times, sometimes that decision maker at a brand can get very like snakes and sparklers with it, to use a Joe Dirt reference, right? Like, I only like these two sports, so that's what we're going to market to. And it's like, but there's a giant opportunity right here, and just because you don't care about it, like, you're kind of missing out here. And I think it takes like a really elevated marketer to be able to evaluate, like, oh wait, what's the opportunity in this sport, regardless of how I feel about it. So, what was your approach to that at Whoop?
Yeah, no, totally. Because yeah, Whoop was a neutral product in terms of the categories of sport that we served. And we eventually had like 6 sport verticals. Like the main ones were CrossFit, like I said, cycling, golf. What were the other 3? Honestly, I can't even remember right now. Also changed drastically over the last several years. But
Yeah.
I even remember, in golf, we signed a deal with the PGA Tour. And again, like my extent of golf is mini golfing and going to the driving range with my dad. But I still had to learn, what was important in the sport and who kind of the big players were. But I guess when kind of identifying, who we wanted to work with, a lot of times it was athletes who were already using our product organically. And so they were kind of already power users and they already had, experience using the product and they could be a spokesperson. And so when we reached out to them, that conversation was really easy. We didn't have to force them to do anything. And I can think of a pro golfer. His name is Scott Stallings. He wasn't the best golfer, but he's in the pro circuit and he's still getting good prize money and all that. but he had just been using our product organically and tagging us. And I managed the Whoop Instagram for 3.5 years. I answered every single DM, every single comment. That was me on the weekends,
Wow.
holed up while I'm watching Netflix. And I could see people constantly tagging us, and Scott was one of them. And he's a dad. He's super personable, relatable. He's a good-looking guy, and me and my coworker Mark reached out to him just to be like, hey, like, can we write a blog about you? Like, we want to write a blog about you being a dad and and balancing recovery and strain and sleep and a pro athlete. And so a lot of those like athlete relationships kind of evolved organically, and it started with just relationship building and reaching out to people who either already used the product or had expressed interest in it. And so when it comes to working with athletes who are in different sport verticals that maybe you're not familiar with, I think at the end of the day, the value proposition of the product is universal. The concepts of recovery, strain, and sleep apply to anyone. So I didn't have to understand golf to understand how Whoop worked for Scott. I didn't have to understand the ins and outs of CrossFit to know that, like, hey, they probably want to know how their diet or how ice baths or how stretching and rolling is recovering or is affecting their recovery, because that's easy for me to relate to. And like I said, the product is universal for everybody. So I tried not to let that kind of stop me from exploring new relationships with athletes, I guess.
Did you have any sort of KPI for the athletes themselves in terms of the ones who were on paid contracts? What what sort of maybe it's onboarding, maybe it's sort of an evaluation, but what were the things that they were being held to account? Was it just an amount of posting? Was there a specific result that you were after? How did you kind of decide who was killing it and who wasn't?
I'd say a lot of it was, yeah, social content and posting and those deliverables, because we didn't really have like performance bonuses at the time when I worked there, just because like we worked with so many different types of athletes and it wasn't based necessarily on like if they're winning things or not. It was more just like what are they doing in their community, in the space, what's their popularity on social media. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think with every athlete contract, it's like you're evaluating the number of impressions you can get, whether that's from social content or general, earned media you're getting out of that athlete. But then also the organic storytelling you're able to do on your channels too, and how people are receiving that. So I think, yeah, it's always kind of tough to say like, well, this is how much revenue an athlete generated for us, because at the end of the day, it's like a lot of it's just brand awareness, and aligning yourself with a big name or a big athlete is going to bring credibility, obviously, to your brand and to your product. And, obviously affiliate sales. I think every Whoop athlete had a Whoop code. So,
Mhm.
of course, that was a really tangible way to know like who's actually being, whose codes are being used. Another tool we use is actually the teams, because Whoop has a function on the app where you can create teams and invite people. So a strategy we used with professional athletes was like have them create a public team that any consumer can join, and have access to their daily strain, sleep, and recovery. So I could wake up and be like, oh, I'm on Gabby Thomas's track team or whatever. And, you see the whole roster of people joining. And some of these teams were thousands of people,
That's so cool.
and like they would give averages and, daily averages of like who was winning for the day. And it was just a fun engagement tool. So we also use that with pro athletes to see like, yeah, how engaged is their audience? So yeah, that was another metric.
That's really cool. I mean, it just gives you extra surface area when it comes to having an opportunity to build activation around that specific athlete. To imagine doing an event where everybody on that person's team could somehow come together in an IRL situation would be really fascinating. It's so interesting, this approach to it too. It's sort of a tricky conversation when it comes to the deliverables or what you need out of an athlete. When I was at Red Bull for a long time, they're like, we actually don't want to tell them what we need from them because we don't want it to feel heavy-handed on their execution. We want it to be natural. And to that, I would push back and be like, Yeah, but at the end of the year, when I have to graduate them out of the brand and they're sitting there like, what did I do wrong? And they didn't know what they needed to do to stick around, like that's a problem, you know? And specifically because people would say, oh, we love the Red Bull brand, but not the product. How are we solving for that through athletes? Can we solve that through the athletes? And yeah, to be super specific might actually sort of taint the way that the athlete speaks about it. It's a tricky line to walk sometimes. But conversely, at Aura, it was very much about the affiliate stuff. And part of that was because shortly after I got there, we switched CEOs. And the new CEO that was incoming was looking at numbers across the board and was, I think a lot of people sort of got mixed up in the formula for growth or performance marketing and the amount of meetings I had to sit through with both the CMO and the CEO trying to explain that like it's a different formula for athletes than it is for performance marketing. Like, yeah, that's cool that you can put $5 in and get $500 out of an ad. And here's the amount of money we're spending on Tia Claire Toomey, our CrossFit athlete. How come we're not getting 100x on our return? It's different. And trying to explain that in 2022 was really challenging. And I've got to imagine that they've maybe figured it out, and more brands have figured it out since then, but maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, like in terms of the affiliate marketing or just leveraging athletes in general.
Just understanding the value of athletes to brands. I think that in lieu of having their own formula or understanding how it worked, they reverted back to like, well, how come it doesn't look like this formula? And there isn't necessarily like a reasonable formula to encompass, because I think athletes do a lot more than just drive sales. They drive brand awareness, they drive value, they drive word of mouth. My fix to it in the moment was like, okay, well, you're purely a DTC brand at this point, or I hadn't got into like Best Buy or anywhere else. So if you can track your media stuff, because every single media story had like an affiliate link attached to it. So take the total traffic to the website and then subtract the communications traffic. That is word of mouth that has to be coming from somewhere. And there's nothing else that we're doing aside from seeding athletes and creators. So I guess that's our metric. That was the closest I could get.
Yeah, it's so hard. I mean, we struggled with this, I mean, at Whoop, but also at Koros too. We had to be really, really smart and really strategic with the money that we were investing, and it was a constant conversation. And I felt kind of differently about it. I was like, I don't really think there's one algorithm that's the solution to how we invest in an athlete. Like athletes have different strengths and different weaknesses, and creators too. Like and some of their rates are higher than others for different reasons. And I think it can be really rigid sometimes if you limit yourself to like, well, if we pay X amount, we're going to get X amount of revenue or X amount of impressions. And at the end of the day, I think it makes sense if you just need something tangible to work around. But marketing is not always tangible, and marketing is ever evolving. And I think to be a good marketer, you have to be flexible and you have to be willing to grow with the trends and also take creative risks too. Because as soon as you figure out one thing, it's going to change next month. So
Yeah, yeah. It's just constant struggle. um one of the other things that we did at Aura, which I want to share a horror story with you, and I'm assuming you probably have more than a few as well. One of the things that we did at Aura too, not related to athletes, we worked with a lot of content creators, and with the wearables category specifically, we had a lot of range to be able to work with it. So we actually worked with Hunter and Tara, two track and field athletes. We did a project with them. We worked with Kara and Nate, the travel influencers. And we had a pretty good run working with people that were YouTubers or, had some sort of social following. And what we tried to do would be to do an integration with their YouTube content and then take that 30-second integration and cut it down for a paid ad. So we had like a shoot it once and we'll use it in two different locations to try to like maximize this whole thing because they obviously have an audience and there was ways to connect all that stuff on the back end. And I think it was a good way to reach out beyond athletes and speak to people in a different place. Those YouTubers reached out to lots of different audiences, and I was specifically trying to move outside of sports with like who we were talking to because like we've been talking about, the sports side is sort of the early adopter, but then there's so much that like the everyday person could get out of wearing one of these products. One of my horror stories though was we worked with Linus Tech Tips, who's like a huge tech influencer. He's got like an empire basically. And, you know, like when you do these sort of things, you have a process of like, okay, here's the brief. It's like a PDF that's like, this is the talking points that you need to hit for our new product. Here's your link. Here's the timing. Here's every single piece of information. And then there's an approvals process where they like send you the stuff and then you like, yep, okay, that looks great. Thank you. Go ahead and move forward. Well, we did this like sort of bigger deal with Linus Tech Tips where there's, you know, because they have a bunch of different channels and then there were all kinds of people making stuff. And we'd looked at one, everything went great. We'd looked at the next one, everything was looking good, like things were moving along and we're really happy. And then for some reason, one of the videos didn't go, it was made by Linus himself, and it went through like a different process where we didn't get to approve it, and it went live. And it was a great video, except for the fact that he mispronounced Aura. He called it Oura. And I'm sitting there just like, oh my God, no. What?
Yeah.
Like one of the biggest tech influencers out there. How big of an issue is this? Is it a massive deal because it's like we're paying for this and you didn't go the process, or do we just let it slide because whatever? And we went the route of like, hey, can you pull this down and just reshoot it with the updated audio, please? Saying our brand name correctly because we paid you a lot of money to say, you know. And also what was confusing is like, you guys have produced a bunch of videos already. Long story short, it didn't go that well. Linus just like completely went after Aura for like asking him to take down a video, and it just like turned into this giant nightmare. And our company, which was loaded with people who live and die by this dude's recommendations, seeing their brand that they work at getting just completely destroyed by somebody who had way more power on the, you know, and reach than we did, was like the worst experience. That was a really long week.
Yeah. I know, man. Yeah. I mean, like sometimes with those tech reviewers, it's like they are a little entitled sometimes. I mean, you know, I've had multiple experiences with DC Rainmaker and reviewing products like Whoop and different Koros products. And you know, it's like when features or bugs hadn't even been solved yet, but we're actively working on it, and then that tech reviewer just blasts you online and like, this doesn't work, that doesn't work, it's a terrible product. And it's like, whoa, wait a second, like this is just the beta version, or this is, you know, we're actively working on these updates and these features. And yeah, it can go south very, very quickly because they do have massive audiences and that stuff lives on the internet forever. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's tough sometimes.
I mean, that was one of the things that I learned in journalism school. You know, we had a course on like writing headlines, and sadly, one of the main tenets of writing catchy headlines that are going to sell, I mean, to date myself at that time, newspapers, is if it bleeds, it leads. So being able to say something awful about a recognized brand for, you know, a specific lane of creator actually is more compelling for their audience to watch than if they're like, yep, this actually works pretty well, I like it. You know, people want to watch the controversy, unfortunately, and it still works to this day. Something I learned in the late 90s in college, you know, still to this day completely applies, which is frustrating when you're trying to do something that you believe is actually like really beneficial to the greater good, right?
Yeah, no, I know. Like, I mean, I'm trying to think of my own horror stories. I guess I'm trying to think at Whoop, like even just because their product was growing so fast, like sometimes we were kind of building the plane as we were flying it. And yeah, one example I can think of is this isn't working with a creator necessarily, but when we came out with the Whoop 3.0, we had switched. Oh man, now everything's coming back to me. We switched over to a membership. We were initially just one-time purchase of the product. and we switched over to a membership. And so it was $30 a month. I think the model changed several times, but people were pissed because we had Whoop lifers who were lifetime members who bought the product, at the very, very beginning and thought that they were going to get Whoop free for the rest of their life, or they would never have to pay membership fees. And we ended up switching that model, and it was like, well, that only applies for the Whoop 2.0. For the Whoop 3.0, you're going to have to pay membership fees if you want to upgrade to that. And again, at the time, I was managing the communications, I was managing the Instagram, and just people just hating
Very
us
upset.
on Instagram, so upset. Whoop's just trying to take my money, and what you guys are doing is against the law. Like just like crazy things. And the reality is at that time everything was going towards a subscription model. I mean,
Aura too, yeah.
yeah, like that's just it values your product at such a higher valuation when it comes to like getting investor funding and showing that you can have recurring revenue. So that's a big reason why we did switch to membership. It's just better business model for us technically. So, um, but yeah, I mean, people blowing up on Instagram and like DMing me thinking I'm just this like Whoop customer service person when I'm actually like the one writing the emails and writing the marketing communications was always the irony was not lost on me.
I was there when Aura switched to subscription and can confirm that was like an absolute nightmare. Now it's like accepted. So I think it's sort of like a one-time thing. Like when you switch to subscription, it is absolutely the right decision for those businesses because if you had to only try to survive off of selling the hardware, like there's no way that they would still be in business probably. I mean, there's only like 2 million rings in circulation right now, but if 2 million people have a monthly recurring revenue, now you've got a business, right?
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
yeah, the backlog in the customer service when that happened was palpable.
I think like people like quit because they were like the customer service people were like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, yeah, I believe it.
And we had also not we hadn't done the same matching to the Android app versus the iOS app. So, when people got their 3.0 with their new product, but the Android app was wonky and had all these glitches, like again, yeah, people were mad. And it stinks with when you're working in tech, like it falls on the customer service, it falls on like the social media person to kind of bear the brunt of all these issues that the engineering and development team is working on behind the scenes.
I think this is really fun to have this conversation though, because so many times you get on a podcast and it's all like, no, everything worked totally perfect and everything is great and every decision we made was an absolute slam dunk. And it's like the reality is it's more about like how you dealt with, and how you persevered and what decisions you made and the context that you had and the perspective that you have now is so important because I think that both of us kind of, trial by fire through some of this stuff we've come out on the other side with a lot of really important perspective of how to work with brands, how to work with athletes, how to work with influencers. The times that things worked, I don't know if I really learned anything, but the times that I went through difficult moments that totally stressed me out and my sleep score the following day was not great, that's actually where I experienced growth. And not saying that it's a great idea to go out and fail all the time, but when it does happen, being able to learn from it and apply it moving forward is so important. And I think it's important to have conversations like this where, yeah, not everything went perfect, but we learned from it and we've adapted and we have more insight moving forward. I think is super valuable for not only us, but also for people to understand that like, I was having a conversation the other day with somebody. I'm like, right now I'm struggling a little bit, but I'm in the in-between time in my story where I'm going to say like I did this thing and then this thing happened and I'm just going to completely skip over this part when I talk about it in the future.
I think working in tech, especially for a startup and a brand new product, it is so difficult. And a lot of people, they probably see Whoop now and it's like, damn, you got Patrick Mahomes, you got Cristiano Ronaldo investing in the product, like probably one of the most successful wearable companies in the market right now. But yeah, it's crazy to think back of like being on the ground floor and seeing all of these issues happen in real time, just putting out one fire next to another. And like, this is like a literal fire, no pun intended, but we had an issue with the batteries at one point, like exploding. So the Whoop battery, you slide it on, which is kind of nice. It's like you don't have to like take it off and charge it. That was a big, value add. It was like you never have to take it off. You just slide the battery on. You don't have to take it out and charge it and lose it. But we had two separate instances of customers emailing us being like, hey, so I had the battery on my wrist and it started sparking and like pretty much caught on fire. What do I do?
Oh.
And like internally at the time, we were like, oh my God, like this is going to tank our business. Like, what if they go on social media and they post it on Twitter and they're like, yeah, Whoop batteries are exploding. It's dangerous, blah, blah, blah. What if it gets picked up by, I don't know, ESPN or some major sports coverage media outlet? But it didn't. Like, the customers were actually super, super understanding, and we were able to work with them to figure out like what the hell was going on. And we did end up having to do a battery recall for a faulty batch. And then again, that was really unpleasant because we had to send out marketing communications. Hey, if you purchased, a Whoop from this period to this period, like we're going to send you a new battery. We've identified an issue. Um, it's, I think part of having a good business is also being really transparent with your customers and honest. And if there is a problem, recognizing that and not ignoring it. Because had we ignored it or not taken it seriously, it could have become a much, much greater issue. It could have, been publicly blasted on social media or had customers like trying to sue us or something. But we took immediate action and, identified what was going on. And I think, again, that's an issue, that's an example of like a very stressful situation and putting out fires, but you learn and you overcome and you figure out kind of how to handle that those crisis moments.
I'm just blown away at how much experience you got to have by being in early at Whoop, like all the different things that you got to handle, from building up their social to working with athletes to dealing with big problems like this, like the breadth of stuff that you got to, have play a big role in is just astounding. What an incredible opportunity and learning experience across the board. And bringing that to any brand in the future, just like there's not a lot of other people out there that have that depth of experience, especially like seeing a brand start and really, build momentum like you did. And like you said, into one of the biggest wearable brands. That is just fascinating.
It was a fun ride. Yeah, I loved every moment of it. And it also helped me become like a very like hybrid marketer because I wasn't just doing social media. I wasn't just managing our email CRM and writing emails and working in HTML. Like I was doing a little bit of everything and kind of touching each aspect of the marketing department and learning how to be cross-functional with product, with engineering, with PR. And because when you're a small team starting out, like you have to wear 10 different hats. And I think that's why working at Whoop just fast tracked me in so many ways because I had to solve problems very, very fast. I had to know how to do a lot of different things at once. And now I feel like I'm at a point in my career where I could go specialize in kind of anything I wanted to. If I want, if I want to just focus on social media, maybe I'll do that. If I want to do creative production, maybe I'll just do that. So I feel like, it's great to have experience where you're a bit of a hybrid marketer and doing a little bit of everything and not starting out too specialized, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. What it makes me think of too, like, because you kind of understand what all the levers and buttons do because you've had to not only use them, but you also have had the chance to test and learn and see how do these two work together when I do this and this, or what happens when I do this, but without this. It's like, it makes me think about like when you get on an airplane and you look into the cockpit and you see all those buttons and you're like, you think the pilot knows what every single one of those buttons does, or do they just like hold on to the steering wheel and like do the thing or stick or whatever it's called in airplanes? You know what every button does. Like that's kind of awesome.
Yeah, I feel like I still have so much to learn too. Like, but yeah, I kind of know a little bit of how everything is a reaction to another thing within marketing. You can't be siloed within marketing. So,
Yeah.
I can see how those relationships work.
This is, I think, why I'm the most excited. Like I was talking to you earlier, I was an instant subscriber to your Substack. You've launched, you'd done a guest post on Matt Trappy's Substack a little while ago, which I'd love to talk about. And then you just launched your own, Not a Conversational Pace. I'm really excited to kind of dig into both of them. Maybe we start with the Matt one, and then we can kind of go into your kind of launch article, if you will. So the first article that you put out was this idea, or it was called like Influencers versus Athletes, Has the Bubble Burst? I'd love for you to talk about the article, but also like what thoughts have you had since then, and what kind of feedback or anything you want to say about putting that out.
Yeah, I mean, I messaged Matt at the time because I was like, hey, like I really love your Substack. I love reading the stuff you're putting out. I have this idea about talking about athletes versus influencers because it's a topic that is constantly coming up in my current role at Koros because I was in athlete management. I had over 20 contracts that I managed, and it was around, I think, October-ish, November. So we were getting to the end of the year where contract renewals were coming up, and you have that next 4-year cycle towards the Olympics. And I was feeling under a ton of pressure because I was like, man, like we can't re-sign everybody. Like we're gonna have to let some people go. But at the time, I was also not really happy with the direction that the company was going in certain aspects because, you know, I very much wanted to maintain several athletes that we were working with and still be able to do a lot of brand marketing and storytelling with them. And kind of the consensus was that we would kind of pivot and go a lot more towards the influencer marketing, which again was fine, and it's a smart business move in many, many ways. But I was trying to find a balance. You know, I was trying to find a balance of there's ways to work with athletes and influencers and have it both be beneficial. So I approached Matt at the time and I was like, hey, can I write this article? Like, I have a lot of thoughts about it. And he was like, yeah, absolutely, 100%. And when I wrote that and finally published it, I didn't really think people would read it. I'll be completely honest. I knew people on Matt's channel would read it because he obviously has a lot of subscribers, but I didn't think people would be reaching out to me and being like, wow, thank you for saying that. You said something that has been on my mind for a long time and I didn't know how to verbalize it, or I was too, like, I didn't want to say anything. The gist of the article was kind of just like, you know, hey, let's take a step back here, because who are we elevating when it comes to influencers? Because there's a lot of misinformation out there and there's a lot of entitlement, I think, and there's no transparency with how much people are getting paid. And a lot of pro athletes are struggling to make ends meet. And then when they see a brand that they're sponsored by working with working with an influencer who's getting an all expenses paid trip to somewhere in the world or some marathon or event, and that athlete's literally struggling, I think a lot of athletes, it just rubs them the wrong way because they're like, I'm the one training and dedicating my life to representing your brand and being on a world stage. And then you have these influencers come in who, you know, you just hire them for a one-time thing or to do a couple social posts and they're making more money than I make in a year. So that, you know, that was a conversation I had with a lot of professional athletes that I worked with, because they would come to me and be like, yeah, this feels transactional. Like, I don't, you know, I want to work with a brand that wants to tell my story and doesn't just view me through the lens of how many likes I get, how many followers I have, how many views I get, because, you know, that ebbs and flows. And some athletes I worked with just felt like they were being put to the wayside because brands didn't really care about them anymore because they wanted to invest all their dollars in influencer advertising. And it really struck a chord with me because I'm an athlete. I'm not a pro athlete, but I'm competitive and I understand. So that's why I wrote the piece.
I think it's really good, and I really liked some of the recommendations that you had at the very end of the article about how athletes could negotiate content stipends with the creators. Because if you are a competitive athlete, you probably don't want to take your eye off the ball if you're trying to be number one. But how do you have content play a role? I think the biggest thing that I caution any athlete against is avoiding content. It has to be part of the mix. Whether you put all the effort into making long and short form content, having a YouTube channel or not, you need to have some some sort of content in your sort of marketing mix, right? As an athlete. Red Bull in the early days, I think, did a really great job with this, where Red Bull Media House existed to build media properties around athletes. But at a certain point, that isn't necessarily sustainable when you have 700 athletes. Like, you got to pick up the ball and run with it. Maybe you can get one project out of Red Bull, but then, the problem they ran into, actually, that I experienced specifically, was like, we would put effort into like a 2-season show with an athlete, but then at the end of the second season, their contract, they'd be asking for more money because they've been featured in all this content. But we made that. So it was like, wait, what do we do here? I think that having some level of, from the brand perspective, developing an athlete's content strategy with them, with the intention that you as a brand are going to use their content stuff as a lever to get your message across, is a good way to sort of understand it, or help subsidize it, when it comes time to discussing the budget. Like, a lot of times people say, like, oh, you take the amount of money that you're putting into the contract for the athlete that they get, and then you double that, or you copy paste, and that's how much you're going to spend to activate. And athlete activation content is probably the best bang for your buck these days, whereas putting on live events might not be. It might be more expensive, right? So I think you're totally spot on. And a lot of the stuff you talked in here, like, brands should invest in storytelling with the athletes and helping them kind of build that. Now, I think I have a nuanced take on this, because I think that where athletes can kind of build a little bit more momentum, and why it's worth athletes doing this, is what I do see a lot of times happening is that a brand would invest in an athlete. I was speaking to a mountain biker who's sort of caught in this loop right now, where he's working with a brand, and every video that he puts out with that brand does like a minimum 250,000 views. But the brand is getting everything, and he's getting paid by the brand, but there's no long-term thing for him. Like, the second that brand drops him, he's back to zero. And so I think it makes sense of like, hey, every time you show up on camera, it's an automatic 250,000 views. Maybe it's time to like start building up your own channel, because if you can do that for yourself, then there will be a point where you don't need that brand, or that brand is going to invest in building your channel instead of just building their own channel out. And then all of a sudden now you have 2 channels that you can work with, and you have a long-term strategy that's not reliant on having that partner. And maybe there's even more value there, but that's sort of like where I want to see athletes go selfishly. And so thinking back to like point number 1 in that kind of recommendation of like the stipend, I'd love to see athletes take that stipend and put it into their own thing. The line that I love is, own it like Oprah, right? Like, own your content empire. Don't put it on somebody's network.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's all about building your own brand, which today you have to know how to do that, or you have to take steps towards that. You have to start somewhere. You might not be an expert right away, and you might start a YouTube channel and your first video only gets 100 views. But I think a good example is Sarah Vaughn. She's a professional marathoner based out here in Boulder, actually. And she started her own YouTube channel that she fully paid for herself. She hired a videographer. They got together and put a series in place leading up to, I think it might have been Chicago. And she's going to be doing the same for Boston, because she's racing Boston this year. And I approached her at Koros because I wanted to sponsor her. I was like, this is great. This is awesome. You've built this channel. And I think, her views were something like 10 to 20,000 views per video, which is pretty solid. And I think one of her videos had like over 100K. But either way, when I was talking with her, she was just like, yeah, like, I don't really know how to do this. Like, I just wanted to start somewhere, and I hired this guy, Nate Kastner, to do my videos for me. And she said once she had momentum, brands started coming to her. And I think she said Rivian is going to be sponsoring her whole Boston series this year. And she has some other brands reaching out to her too. So it's very much like, if you build it, they will come type of situation. Like, if you put yourself out there and you spend time kind of building your brand. I mean, people are going to notice. And I think, it's an immediate yes for a brand if they see an athlete with a successful channel or an up and coming channel that they're obviously putting time and effort into, because that's a growth opportunity to be involved with someone who's actively working on that.
And as an athlete, you have another data point to offer up. You have hard data to say, here's who's watching my stuff. Here's how many people are watching my stuff. Like there's at least something to kind of build off of in that specific scenario. And I think that's also really important. There's another example of someone who's a pro skier and a trail runner, Molly Noyes. I might have mispronounced that, but another person who's amazing in the backcountry, whether it's snow or summer, right? And creating that level of content, and she does compete, but like doesn't need to, because now all of a sudden she has this channel, this community that's forming around her day-to-day stuff. And man, I just think there's so many opportunities for people to just follow that playbook and then lean into the brands that they work with to help them develop this lever that can be beneficial to both sides, both the brand and the athlete specifically. So any other points from that article that really, is there anything that you've thought of sort of since then that you wish you had kind of put into the article, or anything else?
Well, I did after that. I was like, man, I went pretty hard on influencers. I was like, I hope they didn't think I was just talking a bunch of shit. But I think like part of it too is just, the intro of that article was just like how I was watching the New York City Marathon from afar. I had gone in like the last 3 previous years, but in 2024, I stayed home and I watched it on my television. But, I was just doom scrolling Instagram, and it was just like one activation after the other, one influencer after the other, just, oh my God, like everybody just trying to get as much clout as possible from going to 10 different shakeout runs or
Yeah.
posting about whatever brand that they were associated with or whatever dinner that they were going to. And for me, that was just exhausting. And I think that's why that article kind of had that tone of just being like a little frustrated. And so since then, I've been like, okay, like maybe I went a little too hard, but because I have a lot of friends who are literally running influencers, like that's what they do, that's how they make their paycheck.
Yeah.
And I was able to have some conversations with them too. And at the end of the day, I do think influencers are providing a lot of value to brands, which I don't know if I explicitly stated that in my article, but I think there are a lot of creators out there who are doing a great job at marketing themselves and marketing the brands that they work for. And I guess one thing to note too is just that, yeah, if professional athletes kind of don't think creatively and, stay very stalwart in being like, well, no, I'm not gonna post for you, or I'm not gonna do this or that, then they will lose that battle with influencers and content creators, because brands, while they do have to invest in you as an athlete, and while they do have to, hopefully supplement the content that you're putting out, they want to work with people who are proactive and take initiative. And, I've in my role, I've worked with athletes who aren't like that. They don't reach out to me. They don't tell me which races they're doing. They don't make any effort to collaborate with the brand, which makes my job really difficult. And then consequently, yeah, we don't activate them. So, yeah, I think like my second phase of that article would be athletes be more proactive, take initiative, and then influencers just don't give out stupid advice.
Fair, totally fair. Yeah, I have sort of a hot take, I think, on athlete sponsorship in general, in that a lot of athletes and a lot of brands are still stuck in the 90s. And if you think about how everything is evolving, why challenger brands are getting the footholds they are against these bigger brands, I mean, it seems so basic, but like the internet plays an outsized role in the growth of so much of this stuff. And you think about like where contests and competitive athletes are, it's sort of like the radio days of like, oh, I got the result. And in the early days, the only way you got to know about that result was reading about it in Ultra Runner magazine or, wherever else. And now the internet has democratized it in a way where you might read about it in that magazine, but you will probably also see it on like every social media platform in a bunch of different ways through a bunch of different people's filters and opinions and whatever else. And that level of democratization is almost kind of like music, where, you know, if you didn't have a deal with a label that could put you on the radio, you basically didn't exist. And now you can be an indie music artist by putting something on SoundCloud or on YouTube or whatever, and grow and have a real career and a real audience and a real community that loves what you do. And I think that it's sort of the same thing, that now that anybody can make content, the people who are really good at it are going to get a shot that they would never have gotten a shot before, because maybe they couldn't win Boston, they couldn't win UTMB, but it doesn't mean they don't have a story to tell. They don't have a community to speak to that feels very seen when they put their stuff out there. And I think that's a good thing overall.
No, for sure. Yeah, I think the internet has changed that landscape entirely. Anybody can be a celebrity if they want, you know. If I put my all my time and effort into going viral and trying to work my way up, I probably could. I don't really have the energy to do that, but wow, it's made pretty much any industry just so much more accessible for
Yeah.
anyone. And especially, I guess, when we're talking about running, it's made running more accessible too. And that's going back to the influencer conversation. I think that's why a lot of people follow influencers and relate to them, is because they're not elite. They're not, they're not running 120 miles a week and living this really rigid lifestyle. And yeah, so it's just that accessibility factor when it comes to marketing and advertising too.
Well, if anything has gone viral, it's your other article in our Slack channel. Everyone was like all praise. Like I said, instant subscribe, and everybody was so fired up about it. You've got your own Substack, which I think is like just everything that is going to come out of this can be really exciting. And I think having kind of an insight through all this stuff that you've done and all the experiences that you've had and what you've learned along this way is going to be really interesting. The first article that you put out here is called "What Does It Mean to Invest in Women's Performance?" And you kind of talk about a little bit of like what your experience has been, and then also, again, like one thing that I really appreciate about the way that you put content together is that you offer up a lot of sort of what should we do about it, not just like, wow, this is a problem, but like, no, this is what you should be looking for. And even you talk about like, this is what you should probably avoid. Here are the red flags. I think it's really cool the way that you bring all this stuff together, because it's really makes, yeah, just it makes a lot of sense, and it's really valuable. It brings a lot of value to the reader. So any points you want to share from that article too?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. Instant subscribe. I really, really appreciate it. I've been wanting to start a Substack channel for a while now and do a lot more writing that's more just like for me, but also for a community too, and not necessarily for a brand or a company. And yeah, so the Substack, it's called Not a Conversational Pace, and that the reason why I called it that is because I want to push the pace when it comes to topics of conversation in running and sports marketing in general, because I like going there. I like challenging the norm, and I like talking about things that maybe people aren't so comfortable talking about. But one of the things you said too is like I like offering up actionable advice too. I don't want to just be complaining and talking about controversial things, but not have any sort of action or reason behind it. And I also want to back up all of my writing with research and facts. That's why I link to the sources of where I got certain statistics. That's why anything, I write, or in the article where I'm talking about women's performance, I'm backing it up with statistics, because, I can have an opinion, but, for it to really stick and land with people, like I want to back it up with facts. And the conversation of investing in women's performance, I mean, this kind of evolved out of like a negative experience I had in my previous role of being asked to lead women's performance for the brands, but then not really being allowed to do that, or, putting forth a lot of ideas and proposals that didn't really get anywhere or go anywhere. And, I've pretty much only worked in tech my whole life, and I've always had, even at Whoop, it was an all male leadership team. So, at least in marketing. So, I've noticed that pattern, and I've always felt like I had to prove myself, and I always have to double down and prove that I know what I'm talking about or know what I'm doing. And so the reason why I wrote this article was to just kind of be like, hey, like if you are investing in women's performance or you want to make an investment, one, hire women to do that and trust their decisions and their opinions because we have certain experiences that just a man's never gonna experience or feel. And it's not that I like hate men or I'm against men. Like, no, that's not it at all. It's just that I have a really, really good pulse on women's running and women's athletic, stuff in general. So that's just a unique perspective that is so valuable within a company and when you're trying to grow in a certain category. Investing in women's performance is what I wrote in the article. It's not just running targeted ads, being like, all right, we checked off the box to a female demographic. It's like, no, I mean, you really have to understand like what are the challenges we're facing? What are the problems that you can solve as a result of that, with your product and investing in our needs and our growth and our future as athletes. And, it's a smart business decision because you're building a relationship with a female audience and a female community, and you're building that trust. And you're getting brand loyalty too from a young age if you invest in young women in sports. And I just feel so, so passionately about that. And I was finally able to like verbalize it and put it into an article. And I just hope that, in my next role, I'm kind of able to do that and able to communicate that without feeling kind of shut down in a lot of ways. And, I when I'm searching for roles and searching for a company I want to work for, like those are things I'm definitely going to look for. I'm going to look for, how they're elevating female athletes, assuming I'm going to stay in endurance and sports and all that. And I'm going to look for, are they hiring women to lead those roles?
We had a similar conversation with Kate from Zwift, and we were talking about sort of the business case of like, hey, this is a giant audience that will impact your business, but you have to be able to speak to these people, and if you can't speak to them credibly or in a way that's going to resonate with them, then you're going to miss out on a huge business opportunity. And so it's more than just like, the feel good side of like, oh, we're helping, whatever. It does no, it's actually a huge business opportunity for the brand to do this the right way. You are incentivized by profit if you can do this correctly. And there is, like you have laid out really clear in black and white here, there's a right way to do this. And it's not overly complicated, but there are steps you need to take and there are people you need to put in place to get the best result that's going to impact your business in the right way. I just think it feels so, I don't know, it feels obvious when you see it like right there,
Yeah, yeah, when you see it spelled out. Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's not just a feel good thing, like, oh, hire women because we want to be fair and we want to. No, it's a business strategy, like you said, and it does take very specific strategic steps, and also having someone in leadership or someone in place who really understands how to speak to that demographic. So yeah, I think when it comes to smart business decisions, like investing in women's performance is so much more, and that's what I outlined in my article. And I really tried to showcase like how to do that.
I think I've been really lucky in that a lot of the leadership that, like the CMO and president at Red Bull was Amy Taylor, and she was such an incredible leader. And so I've had the benefit of having female leadership in a lot of the places that I've worked at. And even as an athlete manager, when I was at Red Bull, more than half of my roster was, female athletes. And I learned so much and, just having a chance to interact, but also doing my best. And I think any athlete manager would have done the same of like, put these people out front and center, listen to what they say, and then follow that is like a good thing, regardless if they're, whatever background they're coming from is like kind of a good way to go. But yeah, I learned a lot in all of those roles and listening to the people around you and trying to follow suit as a helpful endeavor.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, that's great. I didn't realize that the CEO of Red Bull was a woman. That's amazing to hear.
She is now at Zevia, but she
Oh,
was in charge of marketing for, gosh, like 20 years or something like that. She was she was goals. A lot of listeners to this podcast will recall the Mel Strong interview that we did, and I really thought that Amy has like a Mel Strong kind of energy. So two incredible leaders that we've had a chance to interact with, and yeah, I'm better for it. So.
Yeah.
Well, we usually end the podcast with a segment called BPC, which stands for brand product content. And basically, it's just kind of our chance to shout out something that we find kind of interesting in maybe one of those categories. Since you're the guest on this pod, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I guess one topic that I'm really, really excited about for this year is the overlap of running and fashion and running and lifestyle. I think, even last year we saw a lot of collabs with like On and Loewe, Saucony and the Minted collab. I mean, Hoka has been doing this for a while now, but even we see like Solomon and Kith. We're seeing a lot of crossover in those very kind of cool streetwear, like lifestyle brands with running, and it's making running becoming more mainstream and more cool and more accessible. And I think that's honestly what I'm most excited about this year is because like yeah, I want to see like Brooks running at some point in Paris Fashion Week and doing like cool stuff. Because I've been wearing Brooks Adrenaline since high school when running was nerdy and not cool. So, um, yeah, I think I'm excited to see where that goes this year.
Very cool. And we saw Gabby on the cover of Vogue. So I feel like it's happening. It's definitely moving in this direction, which is super exciting.
For sure. Yeah, I think, well, yeah, another point to that too is just seeing your everyday runner heroes become kind of celebrities and that mainstream culture. Like Gabby Thomas on the cover of Vogue and Anna Hall in Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition. You're seeing a lot of these runners and track and field athletes just kind of elevated to that celebrity status, which is cool to see.
My BPC is the Hoka Run Stop Corner Shop, which what's cool about it is that we're seeing more experiential marketing stuff come back. So if you didn't see this happen, the Run Stop Corner Shop is basically like sort of it's like a pop-up. It's meant to be sort of like a corner shop in London, but then there's like a secret back room and all kinds of other stuff in it. And what I love about it, the execution is great. Like the photos look incredible. The setup looks like they put real intention into making this be something, and they put effort into making the whole thing happen. What I think is really fascinating is just this idea of experiential marketing kind of coming back around in a way where what will this look like when it comes to athletes? Like, cool, you've done a brand one, there's an event tied to it, but what does experiential marketing mean when it's tied to any athlete? And that was a lot of the conversation I've been having with brands on my side of like, cool, we see the content that you're putting out, we see the following and the community that's around that. What does it look like to bring Super Rider to the mat, like to the people? What does this in-person event look like? Is it a camp? Is it a coach? Is it, whatever? And I think I haven't seen a lot of best practice athlete activation in an experiential way, which, can be challenging because there's like one of you and 500 people or whatever. But I'd love to see more experiential marketing stuff happen. I think this was a great example, but there's a lot more to be done in this space. And I'm excited. Maybe we'll see it this year.
Well, I can think of one example. I've been getting targeted ads actually for a weekend trip resort at the Kivana Resort or something, or I don't know if I'm saying that right, Civana. But they have Sarah Hall and Sarah Slattery who are going to be like coaches there, and it's like basically a running retreat for women at this like really incredible, beautiful resort. I think it's in Scottsdale, and they're going to be leading runs, they're going to be doing talks, and I think that's a great way to activate athletes is just have them connect with the community and do something elevated and cool like that.
Very cool. Well, since my phone is sitting right here, that probably means I'm about to get targeted all those ads too. So thank you.
Yes, of course.
That's cool. That's really cool. Well, Allison, thanks so much for the time today. I'm so excited to have you on the pod and to continue reading what you've been writing. Excited to see where your journey goes next, and really thankful that you're part of our Slack community as well. Really excited that you're in there, and yeah, can't wait to see what the future holds.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm super excited.